Hello YouTube and fellow DC Comic fans. I'm Kelly One Shot, and this is the Post-Crisis Podcast. And today, we are finally going to discuss the long-anticipated, many times delayed, final chapter in this DC Comics masterpiece. We are talking about Doomsday Clock number 12 from DC Comics, written by Jeff Johns, with artwork by Gary Frank. Been very excited to talk about this, and it is finally here, so let's begin this Explored and Explained video right now. Okay, so we actually start this story off where we see Dr. Manhattan, and he's kind of analyzing everything. He's analyzing his battle with Superman and the predicament that he's created by meddling and manipulating the DC Comics timeline. He's also thinking back to the past, before he was Dr. Manhattan, when he was still John, and his relationship with Janie, and he talks about the trip that they had to New Jersey, and the day that picture was taken, and that very picture is what Dr. Manhattan has been leaving behind as a small footprint every time he's manipulated or meddled with the DC Comics timeline. And he also sees himself now in front of Superman. It's 11 minutes and 57 seconds until it all ends, and that in an effort to understand the very nature of Superman and the entire metaverse, he reached into the history and he manipulated things and he changed things to understand the very nature of Superman. And though all of this meddling has actually created a scenario where John is now essentially the big bad. He's the big enemy who caused DC Rebirth and beyond. He caused many manipulations throughout the timeline, and that's only now being revealed. And Superman actually wonders, who are you? And Dr. Manhattan tells him that I'm the one you're going to destroy, or I'm going to destroy everything. And Superman's like, what the hell's going on? And it's here where actually the agents of Markovia, like Geoforce and such, are actually here to bring Superman to justice. They still believe that Superman is responsible, along with Firestorm, for all of the people who died during the accident in Markovia in Russia. We actually know that that isn't the case, and that it set off this whole conspiracy theory against Superman, and that was ultimately planned by Adrian Veidt. But either way, we see people like Posar, and they're actually confronting Superman. We see Black Adam here, and he says that he's going to be the one to hold Superman accountable here, and that he won't allow Superman to be controlled and fight for a government that fears him, essentially, here. So now a conflict is arising here, and meanwhile, Dr. Manhattan is kind of going through all of this. He's going through the different dates, and he's talking about leaving the photograph behind on Mars, kind of where it all started here. We see Superman trying to calm both sides down. He's trying to calm down the agents of Markovia. He's trying to calm down Black Adam because he doesn't want a confrontation because there's innocent people in the area. But either way, a fight breaks loose here, and Superman has to deal with it. And unfortunately, the Justice League in its bulk and entirety, and the Titans and all those other groups are out on Mars because they went to confront Dr. Manhattan, this great threat that they thought was the big bad, and they were on Mars to confront him. But sure enough, he made light work of them, and he made his way back to Earth. But because of this, Superman is not, he doesn't have many people on his side. So there's all these different government agencies are actually sending their group of metahumans into the United States to either help or to calm down and clear the situation. We have the Knights from the UK. We have Australia sends a group here. We see that Israel sends their metahuman program as well, and they kind of talk about that. But all the tension is rising here. We actually then go to Rorschach number 2, and we see that he's looking into a building. But then he gets attacked by this man. This man's like, oh, you're trying to rob into my store, and Reggie is bleeding from the back of his head. And it's here where somebody actually stops the man from attacking Reggie, and that's Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred stops the man from attacking Reggie because he wants to help Reggie. He knows that Reggie is going to be the key to them finding Ozymandias before it's all too late. But Reggie doesn't want any help. He doesn't want to help them. He sees that the world is going to end and that everything is going to die. When he looks at the mask of Rorschach, he sees rocks floating around in space. He sees a monster filled with emptiness, and he doesn't want to ever put that mask on again. And he wonders why people like Alfred and the rest of the people here can't see the truth, that there's no hope, that the world's going to end just like his world did. And Alfred tells him, it will, unless we do something to save that. And it's here where we actually talk about the rocks floating around in space and how it's all lost and we can't find hope here. So what's the point? We see this great battle happening in Washington, D.C. with all these many sides, and the good guys don't really look like they're
winning, but who's really the good guys, because everybody's kind of getting played from different angles here. And then we actually go back to Reggie, and he talks about his father and how his father used to wake up with a smile on his face and tell him no matter what happens that you have to make the most of it, that you have to find the positive in people. But he also mentioned that there are some people who are just dark. They always give in to dark thoughts. They can't see the good in people, and they only want everyone else to suffer with them. He's referencing essentially Ozymandias here, and he talks about how the world is this weapon and how it's just killing itself with itself, and it's all falling apart, and that before the world gets dragged down into darkness, we need to just kind of end it here and give up hope. It's here that Batman actually arrives, and he says, yo, I know that you tried to warn me here, and I'm sorry. But Rorschach actually tells him that it doesn't matter, that there's nothing they can do now. And then we actually see Dr. Manhattan back in the alleyway in the fight with Superman here, and there is a family who's about to be attacked by this car that's getting thrown at them. It's a truck, ironically enough, because they keep recreating that moment where Superman catches the truck, that infamous, I believe, 1938 moment of Superman catching the truck, where it pretty much set off DC Comics back then, Action Comics, and it kind of set them off on the path to do what they are now. Superman actually turns around and he goes, whoever you are, you need to help these people. And Dr. Manhattan says, I don't help you. I've already seen it. In less than 4 minutes now, the world's gonna end. Superman falls to the ground as he gets attacked by the many forces, and he says he can't do this alone. And then we actually hear Dr. Manhattan, he's talking about, he remembers this feeling that millions of people were dying, and that the world's sense of peace was brought unhinged, and he sees his own world dying from that alien threat that was there at the end of the Watchmen book, whatever. He talks about how he was a part of this lie because he killed Walter Kovacs to stop it, he kind of aided Adrian Veidt in his plan because it was the best thing to do. And then we actually jump and we see Lex Luthor with Lois Lane, and they've been making their way and figuring out this conspiracy from the far and seeing what's going on here. And Lex has kind of discovered that Dr. Manhattan, or some force in general, has been manipulating the timeline time and time again, and he wants Lois to tell the rest of the world, to write a story about this in case he dies here. He wants her to tell the world this story, and that he's the one who solved it. And then he grabs a gun and he takes himself into action because he's looking for somebody in particular. He wants to confront the comedian for the comedian having attacked him at the beginning of the Watchmen, and I'm sure he wants to confront and talk to Ozymandias as well. Either way, we actually see the comedian, and we see Marionette and Mime, and they're making their way through the city here somewhere, so we know that they're out there, essentially, is what they're telling us by showing us this. And then we see Batman again talking to Reggie here in the streets, and he's saying, so do you believe what Dr. Manhattan does, that everything is already preordained? Because I read Kovac's journal too, and I know who John Osterman is. And Reggie says, yo, if you know who Rorschach is, then you know why I can't wear that mask. And then he talks about Brian Lewis Mothman at the beginning of the series, his supposed friend in the hospital who lied to him by telling him that his father was getting through to Rorschach. But the truth was, Rorschach was getting through to him, and that destroyed his father. And he sees this image over and over again in his mind play out constantly. And Batman tells Reggie right here in this moment, you see a monster when you look at that mask, but you can take it. You can change it. You can make people see something else. That's what it sounds like your friend Brian was trying to do. He just wanted to protect how you remembered your father. Then we actually go to the fight again with Superman, and Superman says to Dr. Manhattan, how can you stand there and not do anything? And Manhattan tells him that my world once had a chance at peace, and that after he left it, they lost, and the world fell to war, and is burning even now. And then he says that 12 seconds, he sees nothing but darkness, and he is the one behind the changes in Superman's life, the loss of mentors and friends that they've never known and have forgotten. But more specifically, he's responsible for the deaths of Superman's parents here. He changed Superman's life out of cold curiosity and wanting to explore and understand what Superman was. So he asked Superman, will you destroy me for it? Or will I defend myself despite my sins? And we see Superman get angry, and he charges up his fist in a brilliant rage, and Dr. Manhattan closes his eyes, ready for anything here, and Superman throws the strongest punch that he can throw. but it's not for Dr. Manhattan. It's for someone trying to attack him. It's for Posar. So Posar gets attacked, and all of a sudden, the flame is snuffed out, and the darkness is still coming, but Dr. Manhattan is confused. He's wondering why Superman defended him, and Superman says that he doesn't know what to think about all of this, but he does know that right now, Dr. Manhattan has a chance. And he says that you talk about me destroying you or you destroying everything beyond so we can see nothing. He says Dr. Manhattan can see nothing here. But maybe there's a third choice here. And he asked Dr. Manhattan who the woman in the picture is. And Dr. Manhattan, he kind of taps into his human emotions once more. And he says she... And he can tell that you can feel the emotion when he's looking at that picture. And Superman says that you're creating those photographs wherever you take your steps. And I assume that they're important to you. And we see the flashback of what happened and when he lost essentially his wife in that moment that he was in that experiment there and it went awry, and then he turned into Dr. Manhattan there in the Watchmen book. And he says that she was, and Superman says that maybe the darkness you see, maybe it takes everything you have to save your world. Maybe you make that choice to save our world. Maybe you do something about it. And it's here that Superman actually, because he's a beacon of hope essentially, and he's an inspiring guy, and he talks sense into Dr. Manhattan, and he shows him that he can actually do something, that maybe fate isn't ordained, and if it is, maybe you can have a role in that ordained fate and you can change it. And Dr. Manhattan says that he now understands everything, and everything will end. And then he shoots out this light across everybody that we've seen throughout Doomsday Clock storyline, and everything kind of goes black. And then we actually see the destruction once more of Krypton. We go back to that moment, and it says this is where it begins, with a child. The metaverse forms around this one and only son, and we see Superman's spaceship actually flying out into space, the spaceship that had baby Kal-El in it after the destruction of Krypton. And we see this ship landing in many time zones, in many parts of history, all at once happening here. And it's here that Dr. Manhattan actually says how he manipulated time, that he moved the lantern 6 inches out of the way of Alan Scott's reach, and he dies and the train careens off the bridge. But then he actually talks about what he's doing now and how he moves the lantern back, how he's rechanging history a little bit here. And we see that conversation at the beginning of Doomsday Clock where Clark had his head down and he was going to go into the party, his high school party, and talk to Lana, but his parents, this is the night that his parents actually died. But now instead, because of the changes that Manhattan is currently making to fix things, it's here that Pa Kent actually tells Clark about the stories of the Justice Society of America, who happened during wartime America to help make the place feel safer. And he said that there were people who have powers like you, Clark. And then he goes into the party, and then we actually see where the crash was going to happen that killed Ma and Pa Kent. But instead of that happening, because of these changes that Manhattan is making and bringing back the Justice Society of America, Superman, aka Superboy at this time, is inspired, and he flies out and he saves his parents on that night so they don't die. So instead, Clark steps into the light and he actually starts working with the Justice Society of America again. And since Superboy exists, that means the Legion of superheroes once more exists in the future, because we know how Superboy was playing a tremendous role into that here. And so the metaverse kind of starts reforming and time catches up to everything at once. But Ozymandias sees this happening, and he sees the various artifacts being interacted with, and he talks to his cat and he says how he sees it too, and he kind of felt like something like this was going to happen, and he's wondering what happened with the old man in the ring. We see Johnny Lightning, and he's reminded that he can't find the genie that he was looking for because he forgot this whole time that he became the lightning, or the thunder rather. He became the Thunderbolt himself, and it's here where Ozymandias wonders what John is doing. And John mentions that the future and the past is finally free here. And as Superman is in his fight, in this battle against all odds, with no help because they're all on Mars, we actually see Irma and the Legion of superheroes. They have returned, and they are here to help Clark because they exist once more. And the entire Legion is going to show up to help Clark in this battle, and we see it on this epic panel, and it's really great. But then we also see the Justice Society of America here to help as well. We see all of the classics. They're all there, and it's a great image and great artwork here. And they all kind of battle against the different groups of the world who are just mad at each other for just being set up against each other here. And then it's here that John Manhattan actually says that he sees tomorrow, the man of tomorrow, and for the first time he's inspired. And then he actually talks about back in 1937, where Superman lifts the car over his head for the first time, and he reveals himself to Metropolis as a hero. He then talks about how decades later, a police scientist is struck by a lightning bolt, and it births forth the Speed Force, and the entire metaverse actually rattles, and it causes this separation in the planets, and this timeline shifts forward, and reality divides for the first time, creating the metaverse. So essentially, when the Flash, Barry Allen, created the Speed Force during his lightning strike, that's when the universe created the metaverse for the first time, and Earth 2 was born. And we see that image of the classic Earth 2, where we see a mixed together hodgepodge of like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Robin, with the Justice Society of America during that time in Earth 2. He also talks about the first and greatest crisis, that the Earth divided once more, and you see the picture from Crisis on Infinite Earths here, and he talks about that, and he says because of that, Earth I becomes Earth 1985, a world that's still unexplored even today, a world that they don't understand. And he says how every time there is a change in the metaverse, the multiverse grows, and they grow. Essentially, every time there's a change in history, every time there's a change somewhere in the metaverse, another planet is created here, and that is essentially to preserve every era of Superman, and that more and more are created and included over the years, including one that Dr. Manhattan interfered with. And after the Flashpoint, a universe was created, and even this Rebirth universe was created, and he talks about Earth 52 is out there, and now he looks beyond all of that, and he actually sees into the year 2020, where Superman's timeline is bombarded by the reckless energies of the old gods, once again warping the metaverse. He says how it's July 2nd, 2025, a crisis unlike anything the metaverse has ever seen, one that they will call Time Masters erupts. And he says that in this, Superman is revitalized in the wake of all of this, and all of his greatest allies return, because that's essentially at the end of this event, where all of the allies from the Justice Society and the Legion of Superheroes are finally back once more. And no matter how many times Superman's existence is attacked, he will survive, because he is the constant in the change. He is the hope, the North Star of the metaverse. And he talks about how in January 2026, the timeline is restored, and Earth 5G is born. So it's gonna happen. Or 5G is gonna happen. So it's just literally just mentioned in this book. That's gonna be that future thing. Not really looking forward to it, but that's what DC Comics is doing next after here. That's why this book was delayed for so long. But he talks about how in July 2026, how Superman goes on a quest to find Bruce Wayne's lost daughter so she can help save Bruce's son. He talks about how in July 2030, a secret crisis begins that shoots Superman throughout all of the universe, where he's going to battle Thor himself, and a green behemoth stronger than even Doomsday will die protecting Superman from these invaders. Perhaps they're mentioning another crisis down the road coming up here in DC Comics. And he says that in this wake, Superman's timeline is pushed forward again, and we pretty much see this happening over and over again. 2038, we see multiple dates. We see 2038, we see 2965, we see all these different 2162, all these different years that are happening, where essentially the spaceship is landing over and over again, and that the child's rocket arrives, and Superman is made, and he is loved, and now and now Dr. Manhattan finally understands his Superman's true purpose, that he will show them the way. And in the millennia, when his timeline converges with the Legion of Superheroes timeline, humanity will finally embrace the ways of Superman, that he is the bridge stretching across generations that will lead everyone to peace. So essentially, Superman just needs to be there always, is what's happening. There always needs to be an era in which Superman exists, in which Superman is happening here. So then we see Ozymandias, and he says that he did it again, and that his plan worked exactly how it was supposed to work, and everything that was needed to clear Superman's name from the Superman theory was on Ozymandias' ship, and he says that he left it for Batman and everybody else to find, because his plan is all going to accordingly. And he says that he sees this blue light here because he's being summoned by Dr. Manhattan, and he's going to be pulled away. and Batman here can't do anything about it. Marionette and Mime are pulled away, and it's here where Dr. Manhattan confronts Rorschach, Marionette and Mime, and he's mainly confronting Adrian Veidt here, and he says that he knows what you did, Veidt, and Veidt tells him that he would expect nothing less at this point in the game, John. He says that essentially, once he learned about Manhattan's vision of Superman, that he knew that it was a simple initiative here. He couldn't convince Dr. Manhattan to use his powers to save their world, but he was certain that Superman would be able to convince Dr. Manhattan to save his planet. So he says, let's go home and let's save everybody today. But then Veidt is shot from the comedian here. But then Lex Luthor shows up, and he uses the device that actually sends the comedian back to exactly where he came from before the energy disturbance and the vibrational frequency. So it brought him right back to where he was supposed to be, and that was falling to his death at the beginning of the Watchmen there. So the comedian's falling to his death, and that's what happens to him. Meanwhile, it's here that Reggie Rorschach actually goes and he stops Adrian Veidt from dying. He puts his hand down on the wound here, and he says that you're gonna live because I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want to stop the bleeding so that you're gonna pay for your crimes and rot in prison. And it's here that Ozymandias says, you're not Rorschach, and he says, no, Rorschach is me. And then it's here where Marionette and Mime are like screaming out they want their son. They were told that if they helped here that they would get their son, and Manhattan tells them that your son is not going to come to you yet, but he will come to you eventually. But you do have a daughter on the way, and that his plan is eventually that they'll see their son, because their son needs them to be an anchor here, just like he needed an anchor himself in the past. And they wonder what this means by an anchor here. And Manhattan actually says that he now sees the light. He sees his final purpose here, and he goes and he talks about how Carter Coleman was his anchor to our world here. And he goes back and he talks to Carter during their last conversation here that they will have. And then he actually tells Carter that he's going to be leaving the situation. And we see that Carter, and he was an actor back in the past, and he was falling apart and he was not really doing too well, but eventually at the end of his career he did bounce back and he did win some awards, and then he actually did do some positive things for the gay community, and he got it removed from being considered a mental disorder in the American Psychiatric Association's diagnosis manual. So that's really cool. And then we actually see things that are happening in the current day now with the Justice Society of America and Legion of Superheroes being back, and how they're looking into the different departments of Metahumans Affairs that are evolving the so-called Superman theory, that they're going to look into this, investigate it, that Martin Stein was actually arrested as well as several other people because they were working on this Superman theory here and creating metahumans for the governments, and that the president himself is probably going to be impeached because he had firsthand knowledge of this situation here. And they talk about Ronnie Raymond and how Wonder Woman's going to start up a Global Guardians team, and how heroes from all over the continent are essentially joining this team so that way they can protect the future from this happening again here. And we actually see Lex Luthor now, he's essentially saying that Adrian Veidt had the right idea, but it can be improved upon. So he's probably inspired essentially from Adrian Veidt, and Lex Luthor is going to be working on a plan much bigger down the road, and I can't wait to see what that is. We see Lois and Clark talking, and she actually says how, like, you changed him, and maybe now he'll have an effect and change other people too. They're referencing Dr. Manhattan here, and it's here where Superman actually runs into his family, his mom and pa, who are alive. They're pretty much showing us that they're alive here, and it's really cool, and it's a really great moment here. But then we actually go back with Dr. Manhattan to his world, and he says how he affected Superman's world in a positive way by bringing these people back, like Ma and Pa Kent and the Justice Society of America. But now Superman will have an effect on his world. He goes back to his world, and it's all blown up, and everything's kind of destroyed, and we see him walking through his planet, and it's 1945, it's 1959, and he finally fixed Janie's watch. It's 1992, and he finally sees the light, and we see rebirth happening on his own planet here. And we see Reggie looking at the gravestone of his father, and he finds warmth in the situation, and he breathes through the fabric of his mask, and he utters, "Thank you." We then see that it's 1993, and Veidt's headquarters has become his own prison. That's where Adrian Veidt is being housed here. But then they also reference how every day after school, a young orphan named Cleopatra Pack stands outside obsessed with the rise and fall of Ozymandias, and that she, as she turns 17, she actually ends up with Babatus, Ozymandias' cat, and that she eventually calls herself Nostalgia, because life doesn't stop, but it does need love. And then we actually see Dr. Manhattan, and he references a situation where he runs into Marionette and Mime back in the Watchmen, pre-Watchmen series going on here in 1984, and how they're going to rob the bank, and now he was just going to obliterate Marionette, but he hesitates to kill her because he sees the future of their son and the great happiness that it'll bring to a woman that he cares about here. And he says that he was always unclear about the details of this kid and the blurred vision that this child's future will have, just that it will bring some woman that he cares about great happiness here. And he finally sees that after all of his experimentations here, he was finally able to realize that the blind spot to the details of the child's future is him himself. And he actually goes in that moment when that child is born, Mime and Marionette's child, their son, and he kind of just takes the kid and he starts raising the kid, because he says that he could never be like Superman because his father was more worried about the future than he was about the present. So he inherited that, so he could never be the hero that this world needs because he didn't have what Superman has. So then we kind of see him raising this kid with a father, with a parent, with someone teaching him and mentoring him. So he wants this kid to have what Superman has here. And he mentioned that this kid is going to come back to the DC Comics universe, and that Mime and Marionette have been left there as an anchor for this kid to essentially come back, and that he will meet his parents once again. And it's here that Dr. Manhattan says that he believes and wishes again that destiny is not without a guiding hand, and that he can be that hand and he can help have an impact in this, and that he goes back and he thinks about what he could have had, the life he could have had with Jenny if this didn't all happen. But it's nice to live in daydreams from time to time. And then he says that his final thought that he gives the last of his powers to this world and this child, so that the planet has a protector who will receive love and return it. This encouragement of all of you out there to stop and smell the roses. So he gives the last of his energy to his planet and to this kid. And then we actually see a family, and they're talking about the Doomsday Clock and how it didn't happen, that the clock was reset, so the world didn't end essentially in the timeline of the Watchmen universe anymore. And then it's here that a young girl actually opens the door because she hears a knock on it as she's talking to her family. She opens the door and she says, "Who are you?" And the kid says that he's sorry to bother them, but he's a friend of your mom, and his dad's brought him here. He said they'll know what to do. And this little girl says that her name is Sally. What's yours? And then we see who this boy is, and it's the boy that John Jones, or Dr. Manhattan was raising, and this boy looks kind of like Dr. Manhattan. He has a symbol on his head, and he says that John calls me Clark. So he's pretty much like a Dr. Manhattan Superman fusion creation, and that's how we end Doomsday Clock here. And that's the end of it here. So this kid is going to eventually come back to the DC Comics timeline, and he's a Dr. Manhattan Superman combo. That's crazy. This whole book series has been crazy and out of hand. I'm so sorry this video has been so long, but I pretty much was just reading and going through it with you again. I've read it once or twice over the weekend, and I really like this book, and it's crazy how it ended. I didn't see it happening that way, but it's been a good read. I probably recommend you to start it, get the issue 1, or when it's compiled into a trade paperback in a few months or so, pick up that. This story is going to be much better to read and much more digestible if you read it all in one sitting. I had to keep constantly going back between back issues to make sure we knew what was going on and following along and seeing that we're actually seeing what's happening in the story correctly, because there's been so many delays, and it's been over a year of this book releasing its entirety of its 12 issues. But I'm happy it's finally over. The Doomsday Clock has reached 0. Everything ends. We're going to the DC Comics 5G, people! Yeah, how about that? Either way, as always, I'm your host, Kelly One Shot. You can find me here, as always, at youtube.com/OneShotTheory, and that's the only place you can find me now. How about that? How about that? Not happy about how that all ended, but either way, here we are. I'm your host, Kelly One Shot. You take care, have a great day, and goodbye!